What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 165 of the DFS MVP. I am your host, TJ Hernandez, in another different setting this week in an Airbnb out here in Denver with my co-host, Matt Savoca. If you're new to DFS MVP, we are a strategy-based DFS podcast. We cover our favorite values on FanDuel DraftKings every single week, and then we get into a theory segment that hopefully makes you a better DFS player overall. We cover the macro, we cover the micro. This week, we're going to be talking about breakout wide receivers early in the season. We have a couple other DFS shows that we would love for you guys to check out. We have our cast review with myself and Matt, 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. That's every Monday, streaming on YouTube. Yahoo DFS with Matt Harmon. That comes out every Saturday, podcast only on both the DFS MVP and the Yahoo feeds. And the DFS Last Look with Jordan Vanek, Sundays, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern time. That is on the 4for4 subscriber only Discord. If you haven't signed up for the subscription yet, head over to 4for4.com. Use the promo code DFSMVP for 10% off. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably already done your fantasy football homework. So take that fantasy football homework and build a roster on PrizePicks. You've already done all the hard work. Turn it into real cash with PrizePicks. Simply pick two or more of your favorite players. Decide if they will go over or under their stat projection. This week, we're loving Jameis Winston passing yards over, Deontay Harris passing yards over. Got a little correlation there. You could find that and more breakdowns in our weekly PrizePick article on 4for4. Download the PrizePicks app today or visit prizepicks.com. If you deposit with the promo code 4for4, that's the number 4, F-O-R, the number 4, you'll get a $100 instant deposit bonus, match dollar for dollar. PrizePicks is hands down the most fun fantasy way, fast and easy way to play fantasy sports. PrizePicks.com. Play today. Matt, welcome to week 4, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Always thrilled to get to this part of the week. Yeah, getting to those value plays. There's a lot of injuries on this slate. Cool. And honestly, at the time of recording, we're at Friday evening, 5 p.m. Eastern time. We still have some uncertainty about some key main slate players, but at least Friday has gotten some things out of the way for us.
Yeah, we're recording this. Obviously, if you're watching live, it's on Friday. But if you're listening, we're recording Friday. A really good reason to make sure you're checking out our articles. Matt and I both have cash game breakdowns. We have a tournament breakdown. But those articles came out today. We're still waiting on some news. So we're not going to get to some of values that by the time, if you're listening to this Sunday morning, they might seem obvious. But we might have to wait. We might briefly touch on some of them, but today we're just going to talk about the guys that we're pretty locked in on. I don't think even if some value opens up, most of the guys we're talking about here, they're going to stay in our player pool. So let's just jump right into it. Start with quarterbacks like we always do. Who are you looking at this week?
Yeah, it's right at the top of the salary range here, but man, how can you not like Josh Allen going against the Houston Texans defense this weekend? I mean, it's a really obvious spot, so we don't need to spend so much time going over why such a huge favorite and a team that blew up offensively last week is a great spot to play the quarterback. But you're looking at a team in the Bills who actually, in Player Profiler's game script ranking, which talks about how far ahead or behind they are, they're number 1 in terms of positive game script, and yet they continue to play at one of the fastest paces in the league, regardless of whether they are ahead or behind. And they're 4th in team pass plays per game right now, and you're seeing that reflected in Allen's individual stats. 3rd in red zone attempts, 4th in overall attempts, 3rd in deep ball attempts, and you don't have to tell anyone about what he can do with his legs, adding to his floor and his ceiling. I just think it's such a perfect spot. He absolutely demolishes 4for4's value metric in terms of FanDuel pricing. It's a little bit harder on DraftKings, but what a slam dunk play, Josh Allen this week.
Yeah, I think there's enough value to get to Josh on DraftKings. Obviously, I wrote up that article like I mentioned. I think this, you said it's an obvious spot. I think it's actually a really fun spot to navigate because unlike last year, the Bills have so many pass catchers that are contributing. So if you are playing tournaments, I do think there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of figure out how to be unique in this game. I mean, you say it is an obvious spot. Are you concerned at all that they're favored by 17? I mean, I have my thoughts on that, but Any concerns about game script there?
Because I'm looking at the pace of play and the amount of times they've just passed in neutral game scripts, I'm going to trust the numbers here and just assume that the Bills' identity is around Josh Allen's play overall. Now, obviously, a running back on a team that is favored by 17 points isn't a bad play. But I just think Allen is set up for success here. There are so many outs, if you will, for him in this game. I just love this spot.
Yeah, I just kind of set you up there because I knew that I was thinking that would be your answer. But it is a question we do get quite a bit, and I think one that's kind of natural to think about. But my thought process there is, if a team gets up to the point where their starters aren't in or they're just running the ball like for more than the last drive or two of the game, everybody that you hope got there. Like if Josh Allen is somehow pulled by the fourth quarter, he probably hit 40 fantasy points or something crazy. Like obviously there's scenarios where he doesn't get the touchdown variance, but I especially with the quarterback, I'm rarely fading them for those situations. Like I want the team that's going to score 50. Another game where one of the teams could score 50, and then we're probably going to see 50 total points over combined is the Chiefs and the Eagles. Now, everybody knows what the Chiefs side can do, but I'm actually on the Jalen Hurts side, at least from a value perspective. Hurts is $7,900 on FanDuel, $6,900 on DraftKings. So, like you said, DK is always a little bit harder to get to those expensive quarterbacks, and $6,900 isn't that cheap, but it's cheaper, obviously, than Josh Allen's $8,000 salary. The Eagles are 7-point underdogs, but with the 54-point implied point total, they still have a decent implied point total themselves. And even though the Eagles looked awful against the Cowboys, we don't necessarily care about that much. We care about fantasy points, and Jalen Hurts has pretty much been producing like we expect. Depending on what site you're on, top 8 in DraftKings points per game, top 4 in FanDuel points per game. He's one of 6 quarterbacks with at least 21 fantasy points per game in all 3 games this year, and a lot of that has to do with his rushing floor. Second most rushing yards in the league behind Lamar Jackson at quarterback, and then he can get it done through the air. Even in that blowout last year, we saw him hit that 300-yard bonus. And Chiefs 31st in 4-for-4 schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed. We should probably mention this is the first week that schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed hit the 4-for-4 website. We take 3 weeks of data to get that. So instead of just raw fantasy points, look at those schedule-adjusted points, and it gives you a number that doesn't have the bias in it. So I think it's really important to look at that. Both of the teams, you mentioned pace with the Bills, both of the teams in this game, top 10 in neutral pace. So we like to see that. If Eagles can keep it close, the game will be paced up. Even if they do fall behind, we saw Jalen be able to put up a big number there. Any last thoughts on quarterback?
Yeah, there's just so many good rushing quarterbacks. We've said this over and over this year, but the top quarterbacks right now, especially when there are no bye weeks, it's just really hard to get away. I think on FanDuel, I think the lowest I really want to go is something like a Dak Prescott, and below that, I'm just kind of ignoring it for cash. For sure. I mean, I have some thoughts in my write-up on DraftKings where I differentiate from that a little bit, but on FanDuel, I think people kind of forget sometimes how much you can do on FanDuel. And if you're going to be a little different, you can just be different with expensive players. So especially at quarterback, it doesn't make sense usually with the guys you mentioned. It just doesn't make sense to go down in salary at quarterback on FanDuel because you don't have to. You can afford them everywhere else. Let's move on to running backs. One of the positions where there's a lot up in the air, but we have a couple guys here that we're pretty sure of. Where are you looking at for running back this week? Yeah, and I should say before we get into this, we didn't take the cop-out answers. Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara are in good spots this weekend. Yeah.
Well, Henry, I would say Henry isn't necessarily a cop-out answer this week because I think actually people are saying, especially on FanDuel, and then we don't talk about Yahoo here, but on Yahoo as well. Like, are you jamming him in because he is so expensive? But yeah, I think I'm hitting lock on Henry, at least in cash for sure.
Yeah, and just to answer your question before I get to my player here, just because the value ranking for Henry looks so much better than the rest of the field on FanDuel, I think it's 2 whole points higher. Now, I know in terms of this value metric, what does 2 points mean? It's significant when you're that far apart from the field. So I have seen some projection sources that have Kamara ahead. Not a bad play at all. I think I'm trying to hashtag jam him in with Derrick Henry this week. But my value player is David Montgomery, Chicago Bears running back. And I have written here in the notes, like, if not now, when for David Montgomery? And we saw some really solid production at the end of the 2020 season, certainly boosting his average draft position this summer in season-long leagues. But he's been fairly disappointing from a production standpoint this year so far. Now he has by far the juiciest matchup from a rushing versus defense matchup. Detroit is tied for 29th in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing offenses. And the opportunity really is there for Montgomery. Say what you will about the overall offense in Chicago right now. Running back 8 in opportunity share at 78%. Running back 10 in route participation rate. Running back 6 in total carries, 4th in rush yards, and 3rd in dominator rating, which is share of team yards and touchdowns, which is especially notable because he only has 1 touchdown. So when I look at a player on FanDuel right now, the running back 10 in salary, I see a value, even though betting on the Bears offense certainly doesn't feel all that great after their performance against the Browns in week 3. I think in a way it's a little better because the field is going to be less inclined to play them, but the opportunity says that we should go back to the well at least one more time in this great matchup with Montgomery.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a very unpopular take here and say that from a fantasy perspective for Montgomery, if you want to be on Cole Kmet or Allen Robinson, like maybe if you have them in redraft, I actually think that this offense is going to be more productive with Andy Dalton. I don't think Andy Dalton should be the starter. I don't think the offense can be better with Andy Dalton. I think from a fantasy perspective, they will produce more fantasy points because I just don't think Matt Nagy is going to be willing to adjust and maximize what Justin Fields could do. They weren't giving him designed rollouts. They weren't letting him create on the fly. They just had a horrible game plan with him last week. And I think the offense should be better with Justin Fields. I think I would rather have Justin Fields on my team and as my quarterback. But I don't think this team or this staff is equipped to do that correctly. I think if they roll Justin Fields out against Detroit, it would be more of the same. And I don't think that's his fault. So, I know that kind of goes against the grain of what you might see on Twitter, but I just don't think that Matt Nagy is good at what he does. And so it's unfortunate. But yeah, I like David Montgomery in this spot because of all the reasons you laid out. And I'm actually going to stay in this game. DeAndre Swift on the other side. And because of Matt Nagy, because of that bad offensive line that we saw that, and I mean, Andy Dalton still didn't have to play behind it. I actually think Detroit can get a small road upset here because the one thing they are good at is rushing the passer, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but we saw them get after Lamar, and I think it could flip the game script pretty easily. And if that does happen, we can see DeAndre Swift add on to why we already like him. We like him because he is one of the most high-volume pass catchers in the league. If it wasn't for Najee Harris's 19 target, 14 catch game last week, DeAndre Swift would lead the league in all receiving metrics. 6 catches per game. He's near the top of the league in high value touches per game, which is a metric that Sam Hoppin looks at in his great article, Hop to Conclusions, every week, where he just looks at usage rates, team rates, pace, things like that. And at running back, very few running backs. I think it's Christian McCaffrey, Najee Harris, and Derrick Henry, only players seeing as much or more high value touches. That's kind of just weights, catches, and touches near the goal line against players' overall usage. And DeAndre Swift is near the top. So he doesn't need to be a 20-plus touch guy to have value, kind of like we've seen with Kamara in the past. But this week, if that game script does flip, they already use their running backs at one of the highest rates in the league. I do think he can approach 20 touches, even if he is only getting something like a 60% running back share. So again, Henry, I'm kind of trying to hit the lock button on him in cash, but these are two guys that I'm very comfortable. And I think, well, actually, I want your thoughts on this. How do you feel about using both of these guys together in a cash or a GPP lineup, and just using opposing running backs together in general?
In a GPP, I'm totally fine with it because all we're doing especially in like single entry or 3 entry tournaments, we're capturing game environments. And I know you've heard us say that word, that phrase before, game environments, but really there are just games that are more advantageous for fantasy scoring than others on a main slate. When you have 13 to pick from, you usually have 2 or 3 that rise to the top. And why is it impossible for those 2 main producers in that quality game environment to be running backs? So I think if you see some correlations that say certain running backs, maybe rush heavy running backs, take away from other running backs on the other side, maybe that's possible. But in general, I'm absolutely fine with it. If it's 2 bell cow running backs getting the most high value touches in a game and that game environment is strong, all systems go.
Yeah, I should actually use that opportunity to say that if you are looking for those correlations on a league level, you probably are going to see no correlation or even a negative correlation between opposing running backs. But we're looking for, like you said, specific environments, specific players, specific player types. And if you want, you can go into the 4for4 DFS player correlation tool and find out which running backs correlate best with different positions, such as opposing running backs. And now that we have 3 weeks of data, again, that is loaded with in-season data, now 2021 data, so you can start getting an idea of that. Let's move on to receivers. And again, I'll start with you. Who's your top guy wide receiver this week?
I made this pick early in the week, and then as I was examining it, I got more and more antsy about it, but I'm still going to stick with it. And I'm going back to the well. I got burned by him in cash last week. If you watched our review show, I still think Robert Woods is a higher quality play than people are giving him credit for. I mean, let's take a second and applaud Cooper Kupp for this insane start to the fantasy season. I was looking at PFF's expected fantasy point model through these first 3 weeks, and Cooper Kupp leads the league in fantasy points over expected per game, which is insane to think about when he's number 1 in expected fantasy points per game. So really what I'm saying about Woods is, and about the Rams offense in general, is that the efficiency is going to maintain, but the opportunity for Kupp is unsustainably high. And some of that opportunity share that Woods has been held from because of Kupp's high ceiling, that's going to rotate back over. And you're actually going to see me talk about this game a little bit later in the show. But I just want to highlight Woods, who is still wide receiver 23 overall in expected fantasy points. Again, that's PFF's model. And wide receiver 11 in red zone targets, which just speaks to the high quality of the offense that he's in. That boosts up the 25% red zone target share. It's really nice to see a higher target share in the red zone than overall. That means he's being looked at more often as they get close to the goal line. You're still talking about a player with 6+ targets in back-to-back games, and the possibility that Patrick Peterson spends time on Cooper Kupp this week trying to shut him down. So I'm liking Robert Woods a little bit more in this high total Vegas matchup.
I'm going to call out our guy Jordan Vanek, who writes our GPP article every week. He called it the Robert Woods experiment, which sounds a little pejorative, Jordan, but I think I'm going to lean a little bit closer to your side. I have to backtrack a little bit. The last couple of weeks, I kind of mentioned how early in the season we can't be for sure, and I think these 2 target shares converge pretty close. I don't feel as strongly about that after 3 weeks. I think it's pretty clear that Cooper Kupp is the one, and the number 2 pass catcher is probably going to be a little more high variance on a weekly level. But that being said, we still are only 3 games into now an 18-week season, and I do think they will still converge a bit. Cooper Kupp isn't going to see 38% of the targets on the season. I mean, like, the most we ever see in a season is like 31, 32%. I think he might be able to maintain 30%, but if that happens, we can still get Woods in that 24, 25% range. So I'm still comfortable with
And TJ, we see in these historical trends that approximately 1.5, so 1 to 2 teams per year have 2 top 12 wide receivers at the end of the season, and usually 4 teams have 2 top 24 wide receivers. Why not the Rams this year?
And we're seeing it. Maybe it's just a coincidence that so many teams have multiple good pass catchers right now, but it seems like we're seeing it more and more, where it's just like there's a handful of offenses that have 2 really good pass catchers, efficient offenses, and the top 24 is getting filled more and more with teammates. So I agree with you. I'm still not worried about Woods yet. Again, this isn't a redraft pod, but I think he's actually probably a pretty good buy low if you do things such as manage teams during the season and make trades, which I don't do anymore. But if you do, I think it's a good idea. My guy, a little bit more expensive, is DJ Moore, 7,300 FanDuel, 6,600 DraftKings at the Cowboys. He's priced like as a fringe wide receiver one, but he's getting clear high-end wide receiver usage. 6th in target share, 10th in air yard share, averaging over 10 targets per game in a game with a 50-point implied total. Carolina is an underdog, but for their primary pass catcher, that could be a good thing because it means they're probably going to have to throw if they do get down. They're down their best weapon in Christian McCaffrey, so that only means somebody's going to get more targets. And teams already throw against Dallas at the 7th highest rate in a neutral game script. So even if the game is close, the way to attack the Cowboys is through the air. And obviously this one has pretty nice shootout potential with that 50-point total. So DJ Moore, one of the best route runners in the league. Matt Harmon talked about it on our pod that's coming out tomorrow. This is the year, or last year was when we saw Moore put it all together in terms of a route runner. Now we're seeing him get that number one usage with no more Curtis Samuel there and Robbie Anderson doing whatever the hell Robbie Anderson's doing right now, which I actually think Robbie Anderson's a pretty good play this week. But DJ Moore, a fantastic play this week. Who else are you liking at wide receiver?
Yeah, I really like DJ Moore too, although we're going to find out if Diggs on the Dallas side of the secondary is for real going against Moore this week. I'm really excited for that. My second
Diggs is a gambler though, right? Like I don't think he's going to shut down Moore. He gets a lot of interceptions, but like he's not going to be a Jalen, is he?
Oh, I don't know yet, but PFF graded him really high last week, so that's definitely something to look at. And he's going to get that little national TV hype boost because of his big game on Monday night.
He looks like he likes to gamble. He looks like a cornerback that likes to gamble, which is good. I mean, I like those corners, but like I think he's gonna. I think DJ Moore might have a little something for him this week.
I think that's fair. All right, so headed to my second wide receiver. Even before we heard the news that George Kittle is truly questioned for this weekend, which is just a bummer. Deebo Samuel looks like a slam dunk value play to me. I have in my notes that I liked him before the Kittle news. I swear, he looked like even just comparing projections.
I can vouch for you. I get access to the notes. Yeah.
Yes, got it. You could just comparing projections to salary-based expectations.
Yeah.
Deebo Samuel just jumps off the page here. And look at these underlying metrics here. It's just really impressive. Wide receiver 5 in targets per route run right now. Wide receiver 4 in yards per route run. Wide receiver 4 in air yard share. Wide receiver 1 in yards after the catch. And now you're talking about a player who's wide receiver 16 in salary on FanDuel. I mean, it's just such an easy choice here for Deebo Samuel, and he's got 3 drops, so his production could be even higher right now. I see some positive regression with that type of opportunity. The fact that he only has 1 touchdown is actually a little low for that. And now the Seattle defense he's playing against tied for 30th. That's 3rd most advantageous for offenses in adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing offenses. All systems go for Deebo.
Yeah, I believe the number is 8. Only 8 players with at least 8 targets in every single game. Deebo's one of them. I believe he's one of 4 players with at least 25% target share in every game. And I mean, the really encouraging thing is we saw Ayuk get back to normal usage last week, and then Deebo pretty much maintained that role. So that's what we were really looking for. And we just kind of have a trio of players that are getting like this high-end usage that are priced just in this fringe wide receiver 1 or outside this wide receiver 1 range. DJ Moore, you mentioned Deebo Samuel, and then Brandon Cooks too. He's not super cheap, but 6,900 FanDuel, 6,400 DraftKings isn't where he should be priced, at least based on the way he's being used. He's one of 5 players with at least 30% of his team's targets this year and at least 40% of his team's air yards. And what I really like about him is this environment opposite this very popular Buffalo passing game. So I do think Brandon Cooks will be a somewhat popular bring back. But at the same time, he is priced around a lot of the players that we just talked about. And depending on what site you're on, priced around some other popular value plays. So I do think people might be a little bit worried about the Buffalo defense because they are really good, but this is just a spot where Brandon Cooks is getting so much of the work that I'm not necessarily too worried about the matchup. They're just throwing it to him a ton, and they're going to have to throw a lot in this game. If they do somehow keep it close, which I just don't imagine how the Texans do that, teams are throwing at the 6th highest rate in neutral game script against the Bills, but I don't think this game script is going to stay neutral very long. The one note that I guess isn't on the show sheet, but I think maybe very important is that before we recorded this, we got official news. AJ Brown, Julio Jones, both out. So our guy NWI, Nick Westbrook-Akine, looks like the value to open up all of the salary this week. We won't get into him, but if you're listening to this Saturday or Sunday, get our guy NWI in there. Who are you looking at your tight end spot this week? With George Kittle questionable, so it really thins it out.
Yeah, it really does, especially, no Waller on the main slate here. Yeah. We do have Hawkinson. We do have Kelsey here. But, we got to think about value in a couple different ways, especially when it comes to tight ends. In cash games, when we're not playing the premium tier at tight ends, what we're really just hoping for is to get close to 3x value. And especially when we're talking about the lower tier, that can mean like 9, 10 points, maybe 3 catches and a touchdown here. And so we're just looking for game environments where ceiling can help us get there. But for tournaments, we have to worry about or just consider the possibility that many tight ends really don't have any realistic path to 20 plus points. Yeah. And so once we get below that premium tier, into that mid-tier salary, it's really important to identify tight ends that have a floor that helps you in cash, but truly for the tournaments, that ceiling, they could get to 25 or so points. So I'm going to go with Tyler Higbee here. Again, we're attacking this high Vegas total game, and we talk all the time about the correlation between home favorites and running backs, but there's almost an equally high correlation between home favorites and tight ends. And so in this situation where after that top tier, it gets really, really murky, I'm just going to lean on, again, that game environment. Higbee has been a little disappointing in terms of opportunity share. He's tight end 18 in target share. It goes up a little higher in the red zone. So again, we're liking seeing Stafford lean on him a little bit more as they get closer to the goal line. But he's outside the top 30 in air yards share. What's really saving him, and what I like about him, is those red zone targets. He's actually top 5 in the league in red zone targets, and he's been efficient when he has received opportunity. He's tight end 7 in yards per target. So I'm going to stick with that game environment. I really think Tyler Higbee is one of the true 25-point potential options. And at 4,600 on DK, you could definitely do worse.
Yeah, if you really want to get frisky in tournaments, you mentioned Woods, you mentioned Higbee. If you stack this game with no Cooper Kupp, at the very least, you're going to be unique. I think a lot of people use one or the other of Higbee, Woods, maybe if they are game stacking or team stacking with Kupp to try to offset his salary or his ownership. I haven't decided if I advise that yet. I actually like Arizona with the Rams bring back, but that's a different podcast and article. But it's a thought. I mean, you're mentioning 2 guys as top values, so if you like them as top values, they should probably be in your tournament player pool as well. No, but your point about tight ends and how we need to be valuing them, I mean, the position is just not good, right? We're kind of getting used to this at this point. Anytime 2 of the best tight ends are going to be off the main slate, assuming Kittle doesn't play, it just gets hairy really fast. And I mean, look, we saw Mike Gesicki, no usage first 2 games, double-digit targets, 1 game. Nobody's going to say like, oh, no, it's sample size. It's like, no, let's play him because there's no other tight ends. It feels like chasing points at tight ends. Dawson Knox scores a touchdown, and now the Bills have a good game. Now Dawson Knox is going to be like a chalky-ish tight end, I guess, if you're like 7-8% ownership is going to be like top 5 ownership. So it feels like chasing points, and we advocate against chasing points. I mean, but at tight end, we kind of have to chase points, right? There's, like you said, there's just so few guys that have opportunity that when we see one get one, it's like, all right, we're going to try to use that. But one guy that doesn't have to chase opportunity, that's getting all the opportunity, is Noah Fant. 5,700 FanDuel, 4,300 DraftKings. We're seeing that salary creep up a little bit, but it's well-deserved. He's 5th in the league in target share among tight ends. Denver was already down Jerry Jeudy. They're down KJ Hamler. Now, I think losing KJ Hamler is bigger than some people are going to get credit for. I think Hamler is a pretty good ancillary piece of that offense, but I think they're going to be fine. The targets are just going to concentrate more on Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant, although I do like Tim Patrick, but he's not going to be a high volume guy. He's going to be a deep target, which is fine. But I just think Fant and Sutton get all the targets. This game is one that I like to flip the script on the expected game environment. Both defenses are good. Denver's defense has been really good, and the projected point total is relatively low. I think it's at 45 or something like that. Both of these defenses face top 7 passing rates in neutral game script. So when teams, even though Denver didn't even have a neutral game script last week, they were up by like 20 the whole game. But when they have been in neutral game script, when they're not up by 2 touchdowns in the second half, teams are throwing against them. So I think both of these offenses throw quite a bit against each other. And we're getting Noah Fant tied to one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league through the first 3 weeks. Teddy Bridgewater, top 3 in adjusted yards per attempt through 3 weeks. He's Noah Fant's price is the tight end 9 on FanDuel, tight end 10 on DK. So like I mentioned, that salary's creeping up a little bit, but still affordable enough, not reflective of that top 5 usage that he's been getting. Move on to the last position for the values defenses. You got quite a bit to say about your team here. Who do you like?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a narrative take. You know, I'm usually very stats focused over here, but the Saints in that first full capacity game in New Orleans since 2019.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I think it's going to be pretty raucous, pretty crazy, and the Giants are undermanned and underwhelming so far offensively. Yeah, we did see them put up a little bit against the Washington football team, but looks like the Washington football team, especially in that first run of schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed, they are not the same defense that we thought they were going into the season. It looks like Slayton and Shepard are going to be out for the Giants offense. And, you know, while Jones' rushing ability gives him a little bit of floor and ceiling to play him in fantasy, we really know what he's going to be on the other side of the ball if you're trying to grade in defense. You're going to get 7 to 8 yards per attempt, a 60 to 70% completion rating. You know, he's QB 28 in true passer rating, which takes out throwaways. And so I'm just not scared of the Giants offense at all in this contest. So it is going to be a little difficult. I know they are higher tier in salary, but the Saints are a rock solid defense. Number 8 in PFF's defensive grade, number 3 in Football Outsiders defensive DVOA. And it should be mentioned that their secondary is getting healthier again. Marshawn Lattimore came back in a big way in week 3. He was ranked cornerback 1 by PFF grading this week.
Yeah, for those that don't remember that aren't sure what Matt's talking about, remember the hurricane, unfortunately, in New Orleans to start the season put the Saints on a neutral site. So their first real home game of the year, and like you said, since 2019 with the crowd, that's actually a really good point. And you briefly mentioned Kamara. I think a Kamara Saints mini correlation is probably a really good tournament play this week. I already touched on my play briefly when I was talking about my running backs, but you can pair up this defense with DeAndre Swift, the Lions, 4,100 on FanDuel. So actually priced appropriately there, I think, which is surprising, down at 2,200 on DraftKings, where I do think they're undervalued, which explains why they're our top defensive value on DraftKings at 4 for 4. They are a small road underdog, but as I mentioned, Chicago, worst adjusted sack rate in the league. Detroit, top 4 adjusted sack rate in the league. And even as underdogs, Chicago's implied point total is just even though the Lions are the underdogs, Chicago's implied point total is just 22.25. And if you go back to the DFS playbook that I worked on this year, we know that implied point total is very important. The lower it is, the better your defense is typically going to do. I don't really care who's at quarterback. I think the Lions can just get after Dalton Orfield. So I like them a lot. If you want to take all of these plays and you're a new FanDuel fantasy player, then your day is about to get 20% better. Start playing fantasy football on FanDuel and you will get a 20% bonus on your first deposit up to $500 by going to FanDuel.com/DFSMVP. That's a big time bonus, and all you need to do to claim it is make your first deposit. We've talked about it almost every week on this podcast. They have some of the best contest structures, especially their single entry GPPs. You could go to my Twitter or to our Discord to check out a breakdown of those tournament structures compared to other sites. And if you don't like those tournaments, there's lots of other formats to play, including the main slate games that we always talk about. They have single game slates, best ball slates, snake drafts. You can even play private contests with your friends. They have the Sunday Million, which I cover every week, strategy in the DFS playbook, but I also break down strategy in the Sunday Million review, which you can find on 4for4. We've talked about our favorite players like DeAndre Swift, like the Lions defense, and their FanDuel salaries this week. Sign up today at FanDuel.com/DFSMVP to claim your bonus and start playing today. That's FanDuel.com/DFSMVP. Age and location restrictions apply. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires after 30 days. My favorite part of this podcast every week is our theory segment, Matt. And you wrote an article this week that covers a new feature at 4for4. And I think it translates very well to theory because we talk a lot about regression, and it has very direct impact on how we make our decisions in DFS. That is our wide receiver breakout model. John Paulson and our resident data scientist, Kevin Zatlugal, have been working on this thing for almost 2 years, really. There's a couple other air yards type of models out there. Josh Hermsmeyer actually wrote for 4for4 and helped us out with some of our initial air yards work here. And this is just our interpretation of using air yards, using wide receiver usage to pinpoint what we're calling breakout players for DFS purposes. We'll call them DFS targets. But before we get into it, since this is our theory segment, let's get into the theory of finding breakout wide receivers on a weekly level, and just talk us through, before we get into the specifics, what is this model? What is modeling in general when it comes to this fantasy stuff?
Yeah, I feel like you hear it more and more often that someone created a model, and what exactly that means can, certainly on sports Twitter, it can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about this particular model, this is using a large data set of historical data to try and predict the future. At its simplest terms, that's all we're doing here. And there's an old saying about models that all models are wrong, some are useful. Meaning that you can never contextualize a model at all the features, at all the things that you want that a human knows how to do. So we're always contextualizing the information from this model. But what it can help us do is use history as a guide to show us where in the future there's in the present, there's an incongruency between a player's usage or their opportunity and their production.
Yeah.
And when we identify those players, we often find situations where that naturally corrects itself in the upcoming weeks. So hence the receiver breakout model. And I do want to mention here that my role in this was towards the very end. You mentioned Kevin and John. They've put so much time into this. And just like you would see in the corporate world where a data scientist puts a model into training before it is put, as they say, into production, as it was put for 4for4 this week. We studied this model. We created at the end of 2019, which meant we spent a whole season studying this, making sure that it was well calibrated. And now it's handed off to me, essentially the data analyst. And so my job in this process is to package those models' results into a consumable and understandable presentation for the target audience, which is, in our case, the readers and the listeners here. So that's why you see charts and graphs that can help you usually. Sometimes they get really complicated and they can actually hinder your understanding of a model. And you'll see a graph that I made at the top of this model this week. And please, if you have some feedback about how it could be more helpful or how you're not understanding it, please hit us up. I'm at Draftaholic or at 4for4 Football. And I don't want to spend too much time here, TJ, but I know that there's probably a small part of the audience that's interested in the really data science heavy aspect of this.
Yeah,
And
we have a smart crowd. I think they won't mind it too much.
Okay, so I actually don't have a lot of the specifics related to things like feature engineering, like was there a clustering algorithm or any sort of unsupervised machine learning done beforehand, or the algorithm specifically used. But we do know that it was validated against a year of real data. And so what we have used a specific error metric, so we don't have anything like an adjusted R squared or an out of sample R squared, which is something that an error metric that you typically see used. But what we do have is that of the underperforming cohort, the people that are underperforming expectation, again, that's the group we're finding breakouts from. On average, they score 90% of their expected fantasy points the following week.
That's a huge point right there.
That's a really solid amount. And obviously there's going to be some variance there. Some people score way over their expected amount. Some people score way under their expected amount. And it ultimately washes out in the fact that they all almost collectively get to that expected value. That's a really strong sign of a well-calibrated model. So it's a long-winded way of saying that we've got a lot of data going into a really strong breakout model. And don't forget about the tight ends. They have a specific algorithm for the tight ends as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important. This is something that we're going to feature very heavily in this podcast, although we're kind of more focused on like just the overall values here, but in our articles a lot. And I think anybody that's already a 4for4 subscriber should definitely make it a point to be seeking this out, even though we'll be linking to it a ton. We do break up the website by redraft, DFS, or call it seasonal on the site, seasonal DFS and betting. So I think a lot of people that might be playing a lot of DFS or focusing on betting a lot might kind of overlook some of the stuff that might be under the seasonal tab. That's where this will live. But it is very important. And I'm going to continue to encourage everybody to be looking at this model. But you kind of talked about just like what it uses from a statistical and modeling standpoint, as far as just like fantasy and football metrics, stats data. What are we looking at here? Like either league level or player level data?
Yeah, so it definitely uses both. That's really important here because we want to make sure that we have an understanding of both on a league level, what is supposed to happen here, all things being equal. But then on a player level, do we have a history of this player performing under or below expectation? Because what we found is that especially the past 10 weeks of player efficiency is highly indicative of how well they use that recent opportunity. Yeah. And so it's really helped us get a stronger model here. And so I'll just dig into it here. The model heavily weights two distinct time periods and tries to combine that together. I already mentioned the past 10 weeks. It uses the opportunity and creates an expected fantasy points model during that time, and efficiency, which is a roll-up of multiple efficiency metrics that use both air yards data, as you mentioned, TJ, and routes run data from our data provider as well. And so that efficiency metrics, there is a little proprietary blend in there, but you can imagine what they are like, similar to yards per route run or targets per route run. So that's how we're creating an opportunity and efficiency metrics here. But then we also look at the past 3 weeks. We found that to be the most important period of time. And that's why we're debuting it in week 4, because now we have 3 weeks of in-season data to really get a feel for the possible changes that have occurred from that 10-week window to the 3-week window. Yeah. And what we found is that even if we just have those 3 weeks, like for rookies or players that were injured, we can make a worthwhile prediction, an expected fantasy points prediction for those players. So the article just goes through the players who are currently underperforming their prediction and highlights players that we think have a chance of breaking out this specific week.
Yeah, early in the season, that just kind of reminded me when you were laying out how we're going to be using it and the time frame we're going to be using it. Early in the season, during our preseason episodes, when we were talking about prepping for the season, one of the things we talked about was how much data we consume and how we have to be careful not to double count things and get too lost in numbers. Kind of like a not point per dollar, but like our proprietary value metric for DFS takes all of the information that is captured in projections, compares it to not to just to salary, but to position scarcity, to other players at other positions. It gives us a really quick value metric. This kind of takes away all of our worries with pass catchers for having to double count, right? Like we're getting all of this information that we need, finding out how much they should be scoring, finding out who's good at meeting that expectation, and then finding out who's good and who hasn't been and is going to continue to do it. So you don't have to worry about double counting with this. This is doing all of the counting for you. So it's just the, like you said, I mean, I can't even express. I've been watching John and Kevin work on this, and luckily I haven't. This is one of the projects I haven't had my hands on. But as you mentioned, they've been back testing it, make sure it works well. That's why it wasn't released last year, because we wanted to make sure it was good. So all of that is just to tell you that every week we're going to give you a chart with these names and say these players are supposed to play good. So how are we going to use that chart?
Yeah, so that's the real thing we want to know, right?
Yeah.
How do we use this?
Give us the
tool?
answers.
Right. I wish I could. So as I mentioned before, the article is going to be highlighting players who over the last 3 weeks are averaging less than their expected fantasy points per game. And remember, it uses a last 3 weeks expected average and then just compares 3 weeks. So sometimes
we should. I don't mean to cut you off, but we should clarify that expected fantasy points is our proprietary metric. So you might see expected fantasy points thrown about. Other sites have theirs. That's our calculated expected fantasy points.
That's correct. And when you're creating a model like this, that is still by far the best metric to use to optimize and to compare the differential. So actually, the column that you see that is honestly the most important is that difference column. Yep. You're going to see some players who are a little bit closer to their expectation than others. And one thing that you cannot do is expect that players who have a further distance from their expected value to have a larger, what they call rubber band effect. There's no evidence that occurs. And another thing you need to pay attention to is multiple pass catchers on the same team showing up on this list, because that often means the quarterback is the one responsible, or at least partially responsible, for those players showing up on that list. Because you'll often see, I'll tell you, the Jets right now are on that list. The whole team will end up below expectation because compared to a league average level, which the model is optimizing for, they're performing under expectation. The value of opportunity on the Jets is less than the average value of the same opportunity on another team. That makes sense. Now, speaking of making this all make sense, the most important part is to contextualize the model's results with John Paulson's award-winning 4-for-4 projections, because, again, the human touch is something that we are valuing very highly here. It's not something that we want to just take away here. The robots are not coming for our jobs in this case.
Not yet.
These projections that John creates are generated in a much more hands-on way. And truly, the blend of this model and those projections is really the best we can do right now in predicting and projecting future performances. So the last thing I'll say is the model cannot account for all changes in personnel, schemes, situation, and it can't tell the difference between what is bad luck and what is poor play. That's for you to decide. And
that's for us to decide, right? That's why you're writing the article. You're going to go in and, like you said, you're going to contextualize some of these numbers, and we're not just going to blindly look at the biggest difference or the biggest expected fantasy points. We're going to hopefully be able to guide you in the right direction. So I think the savvy listener, anybody that's played quite a bit, probably has a good idea where we're going with this. But if you're just jumping in, if you're fast forwarding, if you're washing dishes and not paying attention, how can you apply all of these things to DFS?
So now the last thing is that we're just finding low roster players, again, whose production is incongruent with their opportunity. And that's really all we're finding. And then we add in a little bit of past efficiency, again, than past 10 weeks efficiency, and we get a little bit closer to finding who really should be a breakout player. And one last step, and I'll actually tell you when we get to this list, if you filter out players who scored over their expected value just last week, you often find a list of just maybe 8 or 9 players who really fit all the descriptions here.
Yeah, I will, before, I don't want to forget this, before we move on to the next part. This article is free on 4for4 this week, and I believe that it will stay free. The week 4 article will stay free forever. But obviously for this week's application, go in there, check it out, use it. Week 5 and moving forward will be subscriber only. But if you're listening to this late, you can still go to the week 4 article and just get an idea of what it looks like and what we're offering in this article. But you mentioned that the application of DFS, and the overwhelming number of the time that we're going to use this is going to find low-owned, usually tournament players. I do think there are some cash game applications. Oftentimes we're just going to see some of the higher end receivers on this because they're the highest used wide receivers, right? They're the highest used tight ends. So when they have a couple of bad weeks, they're the ones that are going to be popping on this. So as long as their expected points are staying high, there's going to be spots where people are like, can I use this $7,000 receiver in cash? He hasn't scored 10 points in 3 weeks. I think we can use this and say he's still a viable cash play. And then on the other end of the spectrum, especially on DraftKings, where we're doing a lot of stars and scrubs builds, if you're going to just punt a pass catcher, a tight end or receiver, why not have one of these guys that are in the model? So again, usually going to be using this for tournaments, but I do think there are some cash game applications. We don't usually give more picks on this podcast, but since we're talking about this, since we're making it free this week, you don't have to dive into each player. You can give a quick list. If there's anybody you want to make some points on, you can. Who are people that are popping in this model going in now that we have the 3 weeks of data that the rolling count is going to be 3 weeks for the rest of the season. So who's on that initial list?
Yeah. We'll give out the initial list for free as a little teaser for what you'll get every week. Yeah. But these are all the players who the model predicts are underperforming their current opportunity levels, and that their expected fantasy points for wide receivers is 10 points, half PPR or higher, or for tight ends, 8.5 points or higher. So and all these players had a week 3 that they did not outperform their current expected fantasy points, because those players that did outperform, they may not have gone way over in certain cases, but their ownership level is going to be much different because they showed already that they can reach expectations. So here's the list.
AKA Manny Sanders.
AKA Manny Sanders. He's still on the list, but he had a 2-touchdown game last week. He's not exactly someone we don't know about anymore. Yeah. But here's another build to start it off. Stephon Diggs is still underperforming expectation. That ceiling game is coming for him. I'm just going to rattle off the list real quick here. Michael Pittman, Devontae Parker, Devonta Smith, Cortland Sutton, Sammy Watkins, Calvin Ridley. Please show us something, Falcons offense. Kenny Golladay, and then 2 tight ends for you, Kyle Pitts and Jared Cook. I realize Cook is not on the main slate here, but
a couple that jump off the page to me, and if you have any final thoughts, Cook's not on the main slate this week. A couple that jump out to me, Michael Pittman. I think he's just in a really good spot to be performing very well. You mentioned Diggs. I don't think people are going to be surprised that people like his scenario this week. Devontae Smith, I think he's going to be a really interesting spot against the Chiefs because I already mentioned Jalen Hurts. And then Kyle Pitts, man, I mean, I think he's just going to naturally get so – if he doesn't have another big game this week, I think he's going to continue to get so much hate. And it's our fault. As a community, we hyped him up so much. His usage is fine, but he's doing what a rookie tight end is supposed to do. I'm sorry, TJ. He's not doing what a rookie tight end is supposed to do. He's doing more than a rookie tight end has ever done. Yes,
and it's still not just good enough for fantasy. I mean, just comparing him to the rest of the rookie tight end cohort, historically, he's doing awesome. But
I mean, that's just going to mean we're going to win a lot of money with him in DFS all year, right?
That's right.
Any thoughts that you want to elaborate on any of these guys, or you just want to send people over to the article and make them read it?
Yeah, I'm gonna make you all read it this week.
All right.
It's free on 4for4.
Cool.
And again, the biggest thing is with the table and with the charts that I'm putting in there. If you have clarification questions, if you feel like you have an idea for what would make it easier to understand, easier to read, we want you guys to understand what's going on here and make the best decisions for yourself. So please hit me up. Let me know.
Yeah, definitely hit us up, especially Saturday and Sunday morning. We're pretty active in our Discord. Me, you, Jordan, and Jeff are always in there. Pat James is fantastic about being in there on Sunday mornings. And if you appreciate us giving the bag away a little bit this week, please give us a like and subscribe here on YouTube. Also, if you're a listener, you can please like us on the rate and review us on iTunes if you're listening on audio. And again, if you're looking for another way to get our DFS subscription, you can head over to 4for4.com/PrizePicks. You can get access for as little as $20. You must be a new PrizePicks user. Other DFS shows that I mentioned at top: Cash Game Review, 11 a.m. Pacific time with myself and Matt on YouTube. Yahoo DFS with Matt Harmon every week on Saturdays on the 4for4, and the Yahoo Feeds DFS Last Look with Jordan Vanek Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Subscriber only Discord. If you want more action from us, check us out on the Twitters. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. Matt is at Draftaholic. I'm at TJ Hernandez. We will talk to you guys on Monday.